In a land torn by fear and suspicion, settlers branded kindness to a Ute child as betrayal, igniting hatred that threatened to consume them all. At the center stood Dakota, a fierce warrior whose presence both challenged and unsettled the fragile peace. But Jack, the humble trail cook, chose compassion over revenge, becoming the unexpected bridge between two worlds. Just wait until you discover how this unlikely alliance turned the tide, and why justice in the end found its way through the flames of conflict. Jack Cooper had spent more years than he cared to count behind a simmering pot, his hands stained with soot and grease, his face weathered by relentless sun and biting wind. The trail cook of a wagon train crossing the unforgiving Rockies, Jack was a man carved from the hard edges of survival. Life on the trail had shaped him into a gruff, no-nonsense figure, a man whose motivations boiled down to one simple goal: keep the crew fed, keep them alive. But the land they crossed was merciless. Days stretched long beneath a blazing sun, and the nights brought a chill that crept into the bones. Supplies dwindled faster than the men's patience, and the thin line between endurance and despair frayed with every mile. Tensions simmered beneath the dust-choked air. Men whispered in corners, eyes sharp and wary, the weight of hunger gnawing at their spirits as fiercely as the rocky slopes clawed at their boots. It was during one such uneasy evening, as Jack stoked the dying embers of the campfire, that he noticed a faint rustle from the edge of the clearing. A child, barely more than 7 years old, emerged from the shadows. His frame was fragile, shaking with cold and hunger. Hollow eyes stared up at Jack, eyes that told a story far older than the boy's years. The child's lips trembled, and his small hands reached out, not for food, but for something deeper: mercy. Jack's breath caught. He knew the stories, the warnings. The Ute people were enemies in the eyes of most settlers, fierce warriors defending their land with a determination that brooked no compromise. But here, before him, was not a warrior, but a child stripped of everything but survival. War and famine had claimed innocence, a war waged inside Jack's chest, the duty to his own against the pull of compassion. The last pot of stew simmered low on the fire, its contents barely enough to keep the men going. Sharing it meant risking their ire, possibly their survival. Ignoring the child felt like a betrayal, not just of his conscience, but of the fragile humanity he clung to. The boy's gaze held something steady and urgent, a silent plea that no one else seemed willing to hear. Jack knew that this moment would mark him, split his world in two: the harsh demands of survival on one side, the quiet call of mercy on the other. As the night deepened and the stars blinked cold above, Jack faced a choice that would change everything. Jack's hands trembled slightly as he dipped the worn wooden ladle into the iron pot, scraping the last precious bits of stew from the bottom. The smell was thin now, just a whisper of the rich broth it had been, simmered slowly over days. He looked down at the small figure crouched before him, the Ute boy's eyes wide and fixed on the steaming food. For a long moment, Jack hesitated. The camp's muffled voices buzzed faintly behind him, tension crackling in the air like static. Then, with a heavy heart, He lifted a small portion and carefully poured it into the boy's cupped hands. The boy's fingers closed around the warm stew, his lips parting in a quiet, grateful breath. Jack watched him take a shaky spoonful, the faintest spark of life returning to those hollow eyes. But the moment shattered the fragile calm. From the shadows of the camp, murmurs erupted, low, sharp whispers, spreading like wildfire. "He's aiding the enemy," a voice hissed, harsh and bitter. "Why feed those who would kill us?" another spat. Faces turned toward Jack, eyes narrowed, suspicion and anger burning bright. Jack's jaw clenched against the weight of their judgment. His act was branded treason by those desperate for survival, suspicion faster than understanding. The settlers, worn thin by hunger and fear, saw only betrayal. Yet beneath the rough exterior, Jack held a deeper truth, a quiet conviction that humanity could not be divided so simply, that compassion must endure beyond conflict and fear. As night sank deeper into the valley, a glow flickered on the horizon. The Ute camp stretched like a sea of firelight, 500 tents lit by countless dancing flames. The shadows cast by those fires revealed the silhouettes of warriors, proud, watchful, ready. The settlers' fear twisted into something sharper, darker. It was not just fear now, it was hatred, a coiled storm of distrust aimed like a spear at Jack himself. But amid the rising storm, Jack's heart ached with compassion. For the settlers, worn and desperate, fighting to carve a fragile existence from the wilderness. For the Ute people, fierce defenders of their ancient homeland, bound by honor and survival. And for the boy, caught helpless in the deadly space between. Jack stood silent, the last stew still warm in the boy's hands, and knew that this night would not end without reckoning. The camp was tense, every hand gripping a weapon, every eye scanning the flickering horizon where the Ute fires blazed like a warning. The settlers were bracing for a clash they believed inevitable, a storm of violence born from years of mistrust and fear. But then, from the shadows of the firelight, a small group of figures emerged, not with weapons drawn, but with steady steps and open hands. The Ute delegation approached cautiously, their presence quiet yet commanding. At their head stood Dakota, a man whose gaze was fierce yet thoughtful, his posture calm and deliberate. Dakota's eyes met Jack's across the divide, recognizing something uncommon in the trail cook. A man caught between two worlds, bound by loyalty, yet guided by a deeper conscience. The warriors had heard of Jack's mercy, the small act that defied the growing hatred, and it stirred respect among them. Jack felt his anger rise, not toward the Utes, but at the stubborn resentment that had taken root among his own people. The cycle of fear and retaliation threatened to consume them all, and he refused to let it continue unchecked. With a voice rough from years of hardship but steady with conviction, Jack stepped forward. He faced the settlers, his gaze piercing through the crowd. "This path leads only to ruin," he said. "We are more than our fears. We have the power to choose peace instead of vengeance." The settlers' faces flickered with uncertainty, some eyes narrowing in suspicion, others searching for hope. It was not an easy message to hear, but it was a necessary one. That night, under the watchful glow of countless campfires, an uneasy truce took shape. Bound by a fragile understanding, two peoples once poised for battle found a tentative bridge through Jack, a simple cook who had become much more. The fires of the Ute camp no longer symbolized only war. They now flickered as beacons of possibility. Amidst the darkness, a fragile hope kindled, proof that even in the harshest of times, compassion and courage could light the way toward a better future. As the first pale light of dawn began to soften the night sky, Jack found himself sitting quietly by a small fire alongside the Ute child and Dakota. The boy, once hungry and wary, now rested peacefully, his small face brightening with a faint but genuine smile. The warmth of the flames seemed to echo the fragile warmth growing between these unlikely companions. In that moment, Jack felt the weight of anger he had carried slowly give way to something stronger, a fierce determination to protect the fragile peace that had been so hard won. It was no longer just about survival or grudges. It was about forging a new path where understanding could take root. Around them, the settlers stirred, their eyes beginning to open to the humanity they had long denied in those they called enemies. Old fears and prejudices, once as stubborn as the wilderness itself, started to soften under the quiet illumination of the night fires. What had once been a barrier now showed glimpses of a bridge. The flames that lit up the dark no longer cast shadows of looming conflict alone. They revealed faces full of questions, hope, and the possibility of change. The flickering light symbolized something far greater than a campfire. It was a beacon for new beginnings. Jack's final act, the ladling of his last stew, had become more than a simple meal. It was a seed planted in the soil of division, a small but powerful gesture of kindness and trust in a world too often divided by suspicion and fear. As the first rays of sunlight stretched across the horizon, Jack looked out with quiet resolve. His fight was far from over, but the dawn brought with it a promise that even amid uncertainty, there was hope, and with that hope, a chance to build something better together.